أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين حبيب إله العالمين أبي القاسم المصطفى محمد وأهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين. Dearest brothers and sisters, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. One of the very beautiful ideals of our holy religion is that it calls for a state of equilibrium and modesty in all affairs in life. And in fact, we mentioned this point in the beginning of this series, and that is that as a human being we are composed of two dimensions. On the one hand, we have the spiritual dimension, our connection with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and on the other hand, we are composed of a physical dimension which includes our desires, our worldly and material desires. And we noticed and we said that as a human being, what is expected of us is that we maintain an equilibrium between these two dimensions, that neither do we allow our spiritual essence to take over our physical dimension and abstain completely from the world and our material desires, nor do we allow our physical desires to take over our spiritual essence. What is expected of us is that we maintain a balance, that we maintain a constant equilibrium, that we are constantly modest in all affairs, in all aspects of our life. And this is what our teachings emphasize on. But specifically, they emphasize on two very important desires, that we do not allow these two desires to take over, and that is the stomach, and the other is our private parts. In other words, we notice that our teachings tell us that when it comes to consuming food, that we should make sure we do not allow this physical desire, the consumption of food, to take over, to control us. And the same goes for our physical desires, our desires that have to do with our sexual desire. This, we notice that these two issues, these two desires, our narrations, our teachings, they emphasize on very much so. When it comes to food and when it comes to our physical desires, we notice that Islam says, first of all, we have to make sure that that which we consume is halal. This is the first and most important step. The most important step is that we make sure that which we are consuming, that which we are eating, and that we are feeding our family and our children is halal. In other words, it has been given, it has been taken from lawful means. That means that when we go out and we make a living, we make sure that the money that we make, the money that we are earning, that income is lawful. There is no haram in it. We have not cheated anyone. We have not stolen this money and bought food with it. And of course, the other aspect is that the food itself is halal, that we make sure that the conditions which are stated in the books of jurisprudence, they are taken care of before we eat. Because we are not allowed to eat anything we want. There are certain conditions which are mentioned in the books of jurisprudence and the Holy Quran, and the narrations of the Imams, the Ahlul bayt salamullahi alayhim, which tell us what we are allowed to eat and what we are not allowed to eat. And they give us certain conditions. So the first and most important step is that we make sure that that which we consume is halal. And secondly, that we make sure that that which we consume in moderate means, modestly. In other words, that we do not consume excessively, that we do not go on the path of extravagance. This is very important. These are what our teachings emphasize on, very much so. When we look at the Quran, the narrations of the Prophet and the Ahlul Bayt, this is what we find. For example, we notice that our fifth Imam, Imam al-Baqir, salamullahi alayh, He says, ما من عبادة أفضل عند الله من عفة بطن وفرج. That there is no worship more valuable in the eyes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala than modesty of the stomach and the private parts. That we make sure that there is modesty. We make sure that there is no excessiveness, that there is no extravagance when it comes to these desires that we have. One day a man came to Imam al-Baqir salamullahi alayhi, and he told him, "O Imam, as for my worship, my praying, my fasting, I do not perform any action more than that which I am obligated. I am obligated to pray 5 times a day, I pray 5 times a day. I don't pray more than that. I am obligated to fast during the month of Ramadan, I fast during the month of Ramadan, no more than that." He told him, "Inni da'iful amal." My actions, my good deeds, they're weak. I am not on a high standard of good deeds. Qalilu salat. I pray only that which I have to. Qalilu siyam. I fast only that which I have to. Walakinni, however, arju an la akula illa halalan wa la ankiha illa halala. I make sure, O Imam, that although I do not perform all of these extra activities, all of these extra good deeds, but when it comes to my consumption of food, I make sure that my consumption is halal. I make sure that when it comes to fulfilling other physical desires, I make sure that it is within the lawful scope, that I do not perform anything unlawful outside of the boundaries which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has designated. The Imam told him, وَأَيُّ جِهَادٍ أَفْضَلُ مِنْ عِفَّةِ بَطْنٍ وَفَرْجٍ. What better worship, what better struggle can you perform, what better life can you live than modesty when it comes to these affairs? Therefore, we notice that our teachings, they emphasize on these points. We notice in another hadith by the Holy Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wa sallam, he says, أَكْثَرُ مَا تَلِجُ بِهِ أُمَّتِيَ النَّارِ الْأَجْوَفَانِ الْبَطْنَ وَالْفَرْجِ. He says that most people, they unfortunately will end up in hellfire because of 2 things. Because one is their stomach and one is their private parts. Because they are not able to control them. They do not live life modestly. When it comes to these desires, they are excessive. When it comes to food, they eat whatever it is, in any amount it is. They do not take care that it is halal or haram, that it is lawful or unlawful. And when it comes to other desires, the same goes. So he says the best way to avoid hell is for us to make sure that our desires are taken care of, that we are modest, that we make sure we do not allow these desires to take over our bodies, to take over our lifestyle. Now, don't get me wrong. Here, Islam is not saying that we should completely abstain from fulfilling our desires. After all, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the one who gave us. He's the one who gifted us with a physical dimension, with physical desires, and they serve very important roles in our life. However, what is expected is modesty, that we uphold moderation, that we eat and we drink, but in modesty, that we fulfill other physical desires, but in modesty, not to cross those boundaries which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has set for each and every one of us. This is very important. This is what our teachings emphasize on. Now we notice that extravagance and excess has many evil consequences. It has many evil results, not only on our spiritual essence, but even on our physical essence. We notice that many of the diseases nowadays, cardiovascular diseases, diabetes, all of the other diseases that we find, the illnesses, they are a result of excess. We notice that many people have to visit the hospital because either they eat too much or they don't care what they eat, they don't maintain a healthy lifestyle, and thus they end up feeling ill. They end up having negative influences on their own bodies. And our Imams and the Holy Prophet, they were not only spiritual doctors, brothers and sisters. They were not only people who taught us how to spiritually become successful, how to become closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala spiritually. No, they were physical doctors at the same time. And thus we notice our master, Imam Ali, salamullahi alayh, he gives very beautiful advice to his son, Imam al-Hasan, salamullahi alayh. He tells him, if you want to avoid the doctor, my son, then pay attention to these 4 pieces of advice. And if you take care of them, you will definitely avoid visiting the doctor. In other words, you will not become physically ill. He told him, number 1, he says, لا تجلس على الطعام إلا وأنت جائع. Do not sit at the dinner table, do not eat, do not approach eating unless you are hungry. That means that if you are not hungry, do not come to the dinner table. Do not overfill yourself. If you do not feel like eating, if it's not a necessity for you to eat, do not eat. We notice that many times some people, perhaps they have just had lunch or they have just had dinner, but after that, they cannot stop eating. They continue to eat. Even after they become full, they continue to consume and consume and consume. And this is what results in people becoming sick. So this is the first piece of advice that the Imam tells his son. He says, if you are not hungry, do not sit down on the dinner table and consume food. Number 2, he says, وَلَا تَقُمْ عَنِ الطَّعَامِ إِلَّا وَأَنْتَ تَشْتَهِيهِ. And you should get up from the dinner table while you are still hungry. In other words, begin eating when you are hungry and end when you are still hungry also. In other words, what the Imam is trying to tell his son here is that you should not fill yourself up. Some people, they fill themselves up all the way to the neck. They do not leave any room for anything else. And this is what the Imam is advising his son to abstain from. Not to eat until he becomes overfull. To make sure that there is still some room, that you can breathe afterwards. Some people, it's very funny because they eat and eat until they cannot breathe anymore. They cannot move anymore. Many times, they have to immediately lie down after eating. So this is the second piece of advice. The third piece of advice that the Imam, salamullahi alayhi, gives his son, he tells, وَجَوِّدِ الْمَضْغَ. He says, when you eat, when you put the food in your mouth, when you are chewing the food, that make sure you chew it thoroughly. Some people, when they are very hungry, they end up slurping everything, swallowing everything without chewing. The Imam here, he is telling us that when you place the food in your mouth, you should chew it thoroughly, so that once you digest it, you will be able to digest it properly. And this is what science teaches us. Medicine teaches us that we should make sure that we chew our food thoroughly, so that we are able to digest it properly. This is number 3. And number 4, the Imam says, وَإِذَا نِمْتَ فَأَعْرَضْ نَفْسَكَ عَلَى الْخَلَاءِ. When it's time for you to go to sleep, right before you go to sleep, make sure that you go to the restroom, to the bathroom. Because many times we notice that some people, they do not go, and this causes serious illnesses for them. Many people end up having serious illnesses because of this. Therefore, we notice that our teachings, they emphasize that in all affairs, every aspect of our life, we are expected to uphold moderation, to uphold a state of equilibrium, a balance. The Holy Quran, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, كُلُوا وَاشْرَبُوا وَلَا تُسْرِفُوا. Eat, drink. Go ahead and eat. Go ahead and drink. No one's going to stop you. But make sure you do not waste. Do not be excessive. Because there are perhaps other people that do not have that food that you have. Many times we end up throwing food away, and perhaps someone right next door or down the street or in our community, he or she does not have that food to eat. We have to make sure that we do not waste those blessings that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given us. Do not eat more than you have to, because this will have negative impact on your life, on the way you live, on your lifestyle, on your body, on your soul. Therefore, we have to make sure that we really take these things into consideration, because extravagance has many negative effects on our life. Thus, we noticed one of the beautiful acts of worship in which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has mandated upon us is the obligation of fasting. Allah has obligated for us to fast. One of the issues, one of the results is that we are able to control our desires, these physical desires. Thus, brothers and sisters, in the end, I ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to guide us all to the straight path. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.